He looked up at the walls. Saladin, the man who had reconquered Jerusalem after 90 years of Christian rule, the most feared military commander in the world, standing at the head of the most powerful Muslim army assembled in a generation, looked up at the walls of Perched in the autumn of 1188 and rode away. No assault, no siege, no attempt. This was not a man who avoided difficult battles. Saladin had spent his entire career doing things other commanders considered impossible. And he looked at Perched, a castle held by fewer than 2,000 men, and decided it could not be done. He was right. For 130 years, no army on earth could take it. Not Nur ad-Din, not Saladin, not the armies that came after them year after year, decade after decade, looking up at those walls and making the same calculation. Not worth it, not possible. Until 1271, until Sultan Baybars arrived with an army, a siege, and something no wall in the world could stop. A piece of paper. This is not a story about the greatest castle ever built. This is a story about what happens when you build something so perfect that the only way to defeat it is to make the men inside defeat themselves. Welcome to the Clash of Ancients. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, new battle every week. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Here is what most people get wrong about Perched. They treat it as an architectural story, a marvel of medieval engineering, a tourist destination. They talk about its walls and its towers, and all of that is true, and none of it is the point. Perched was not remarkable because of how it was built. It was remarkable because of what it did. For 130 years, in the most contested military landscape in the medieval world, it held. While Crusader kingdoms rose and collapsed around it, while Jerusalem was lost and recovered, and lost again, Perched held. That is the story, not the stones. What the stones made possible. The Homs Gap is a natural corridor through the mountains of western Syria, the only practical route between the Syrian interior and the Mediterranean coast. Every army moving between Damascus and the sea had to reckon with it. And sitting directly above it, on a ridge dominating every approach for miles, was Perched. Whoever held Perched controlled the corridor. Whoever controlled the corridor controlled the movement of armies across the entire region. In 1142, the Count of Tripoli gave the castle to the Knights Hospitaller, the military religious order of warrior monks who had taken vows of poverty and obedience and who had also taken up arms in defense of Christian pilgrims. They were the most disciplined, most motivated military force in the Crusader states, and they understood immediately what they had been given. Over the following decades, they rebuilt Perched into something that had never existed before. A fortress so comprehensively engineered that it did not merely resist assault. It made assault irrational. Two complete rings of walls, one inside the other. The outer walls 30 meters thick at the base. Not because stone is invincible, but because undermining 30 meters of solid stone is not a military operation. It is a geological one. Round towers that distributed force evenly across their circumference with no corners to collapse. A glacis, a sloping stone skirt, angled precisely to make scaling ladders slide outward rather than rest against the wall. And water, an aqueduct feeding cisterns capable of sustaining the garrison for years. Siege by thirst was simply not available at Perched. 5 years of food stores. Always, every conventional method of medieval siege warfare had been anticipated and neutralized before the first attacker arrived. When Nur ad-Din attempted to take Perched in 1163, he failed. His army could not get close enough to effectively deploy siege equipment. He retreated and never tried again. 25 years later, Saladin arrived and made the same assessment in a single afternoon. He rode away, unconquered, unconquerable, or so it seemed. But here is what the castle's legend obscures. Crac des Chevaliers was not invincible because of its walls alone. Walls are stone. Stone is permanent. But the people who maintain walls, who stand on them in winter and summer, who watch for approaching armies, people are not permanent. People get sick. People die. People need to be replaced and resupplied. And as the 12th century became the 13th, the Crusader world that sustained Crac was quietly, steadily, irreversibly shrinking. The Crusader states had never been large. They controlled a narrow strip of coastline and interior, sustained by a continuous flow of knights, soldiers, and money from Europe. That flow had never been reliable. It depended on the enthusiasm of European monarchs for crusading, enthusiasm that rose and fell with politics and economics, and the competing demands of wars closer to home. After Saladin's reconquest of Jerusalem in 1187, the flow began to slow. The Third Crusade recovered the coastline, but not Jerusalem. The Fourth Crusade in 1204 never reached the Holy Land at all. It sacked Constantinople instead. European attention and European soldiers were increasingly directed elsewhere, and Crac des Chevaliers began to feel the consequences. The garrison that had numbered close to 2,000 knights at its peak began to decline. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, year by year as replacements became harder to find. By the mid-13th century, the garrison that had once filled every tower was operating with a fraction of its former strength. The surrounding territory told the same story. The villages that had supplied Crac with food and local intelligence, the human ecosystem a castle requires to function as more than a monument, were increasingly beyond the garrison's ability to protect. The world outside the walls was contracting, and inside the walls the men who remained could feel it. Then came Baybars. In 1260, the Mongols, sweeping westward across Asia, destroying everything in their path, were stopped at the Battle of Ain Jalut by the Mamluks of Egypt. The Mamluks were a military caste of extraordinary effectiveness, slave soldiers trained from childhood in cavalry warfare, who had overthrown their masters and built a sultanate that would prove to be the most formidable military power the Crusader states had ever faced. Their sultan, by 1271, was Baybars. Baybars was not like the commanders who had come before him. He was not impulsive, not interested in dramatic gestures. He was systematic, patient, methodical, a mind that had spent years dismantling the Crusader presence in the Holy Land castle by castle, never overextending, never wasting resources on objectives that cost more than they were worth. He had taken Caesarea, Arsuf, Safed. Each one fell to overwhelming force, careful preparation, and precisely applied psychological pressure. Now he looked at Crac des Chevaliers. And unlike Saladin, he did not ride away. Because Baybars understood something Saladin had not faced, the castle had not weakened. But the world that sustained it had collapsed almost entirely. Saladin had faced a Crac that could be resupplied indefinitely by a functioning Crusader system. Baybars faced a Crac whose garrison had shrunk to perhaps 200 men, whose surrounding territory was gone, whose connection to the outside world was a thread rather than a lifeline. He arrived in February 1271 with an army that covered the plain from horizon to horizon. He did not attempt to storm the walls. He was too intelligent for that. Instead, he did what he had always done. He cut the roads. He intercepted resupply attempts. He brought forward siege engines not to breach the outer walls, but to keep the defenders occupied, to force exhausted men to man walls continuously, with no rest and no replacements. And he waited. The garrison inside watched from the towers. They had food, they had water, they had walls no army had ever broken. What they did not have was any realistic prospect of relief. The Hospitaller Grand Master was in Tripoli, too far, too weak, facing too many of his own problems to mount a rescue. The garrison of Croix des Chevaliers was, for the first time in 130 years, genuinely alone. Baybars understood this completely. A garrison that believes relief is coming can hold indefinitely. A garrison that knows relief is not coming faces a different calculation. Not whether the walls can be held. The walls could always be held. But whether holding them serves any purpose when the world outside has already moved on. He needed the garrison to reach that conclusion, and he had an idea about how to help them get there. The winter of 1271 was cold on the ridge above the Homs Gap. Inside Krak, the garrison had been watching Baybar's army for weeks. These were not men who frightened easily. They were military monks who regarded death in defense of the Holy Land as a form of grace. They had food. They had water. They had walls that had turned away every army that had ever approached them. What the Chronicles record is not fear. It is exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, though manning walls through a winter siege with a fraction of the garrison's designed strength produces its own weariness. Something deeper. The exhaustion of men who have watched the world they were defending contract around them, who understand, with the clarity that comes from standing on a high place and seeing a long distance, that what they are defending no longer exists in the way it once did. The Jerusalem they had come to protect had been in Muslim hands for 80 years. The Crusader kingdom was a strip of coastline. The reinforcements were not coming. They held the walls anyway. Because that is what Hospitallers did. Because sometimes the only thing left is the thing you are standing on. Outside in Baybar's camp on the plain below, the atmosphere was entirely different. Baybar spent his evenings with his secretaries and advisors, planning not just the end of the siege but what came after it. Croix des Chevaliers, once taken, would become a Mamluk fortress. Its concentric walls, its water system, its food storage, everything would serve his purposes as effectively as it had served the Hospitallers. He was not planning to destroy what he was about to receive. He was planning to use it. And somewhere in those evening consultations, the idea that would end the siege took shape. Not a new assault, not a siege engine, not a tunnel or a ram, a letter. Stop for a moment. Before the letter, before the surrender, before the end of 130 years, consider what the men inside those walls actually were. Not symbols, not abstractions. Men who had come to a ridge above a Syrian plain and spent their lives maintaining something they believed was worth maintaining. Some of them had been born inside those walls, children who had never known any other world. They had held. For 130 years, someone had always held. What does it cost a man to be the last one? The letter arrived in the spring of 1271. It was addressed to the garrison commander of Croix des Chevaliers. It bore the seal of the Hospitaller Grand Master in Tripoli. Written in the correct form, with the correct language, with the correct level of authority, it instructed the garrison to surrender to Sultan Baybars on negotiated terms, honorable terms. The garrison would leave with their lives, their weapons, their dignity. They would march out as soldiers, not prisoners. The garrison read it, and they believed it. Here is what makes this the most extraordinary moment in the entire 130-year history of Croix des Chevaliers. More extraordinary than Saladin's departure, more extraordinary than every siege that had broken against those walls across 13 decades. The letter was a forgery. Baybars had written it himself. His secretaries, men skilled in the administrative language of the Crusader states, had produced something convincing enough that trained Hospitaller officers, men who had handled official correspondence their entire careers, did not question it. The Grand Master in Tripoli had sent no such instruction. The order to surrender did not exist. What existed was a piece of paper, and 130 years of invincibility ended because of it. Think about what that means. The walls of Croc des Chevaliers had never been breached. Not once in 130 years had an enemy soldier crossed them by force. The towers had never fallen. The gates had never been forced. Every army that had approached had eventually left, defeated not by the garrison's swords, but by the castle's design, by the mathematics of what taking it would cost versus what it was worth. Baybars understood something every commander before him had missed. The castle was not the obstacle. The men inside it were the obstacle. And men, unlike stone, can be deceived, can be made to believe something untrue and act on that belief with complete sincerity. The walls were impervious to undermining, to bombardment, to escalade, to every physical assault medieval warfare could devise. But they were not impervious to a garrison that had decided, on the basis of what they believed were legitimate orders, that surrender was the right course of action. Baybars had not defeated the castle. He had defeated the idea of the castle, the belief, held by the men inside, that holding was both possible and purposeful. Once that belief was gone, the walls were just stone. The garrison assembled. They gathered what they could carry. They performed whatever final rituals soldiers perform when leaving a place they have defended, some of them, perhaps, for their entire lives. And then the gates of Croc des Chevaliers opened, not forced, not broken, not burned, opened from the inside by the men who had held them for 130 years. The Hospitaller garrison marched out with honors of war, flags carried, drums beating. Baybars observed the terms. The garrison walked to Tripoli unmolested. They were alive. They had lost everything else. As the last Hospitaller soldier passed through the gate, Baybar's army entered Croc des Chevaliers for the first time. They walked through the outer gate, across the courtyard designed as a killing ground, through the inner gate, and into the castle that had defined the military landscape of Syria for 13 decades. The towers were intact, the walls unbreached, the cisterns full, the storerooms still provisioned. Every physical element of the greatest fortress in the medieval world was exactly as the Hospitallers had left it, perfect, functional, ready. The forgery, when it became known, produced reactions the chronicles record carefully. Admiration for Baybar's ingenuity from some quarters, outrage from the Crusader side, and from others, a philosophical dismay. The recognition that if Croc des Chevaliers could fall to a forged letter, then no castle was truly safe from the right mind applied to the right problem. The physical fortress had proven everything its designers promised. It was the human element, trust, authority, the belief that an order from a superior must be obeyed, that had proven to be the vulnerability no wall could protect against. Croc des Chevaliers stands today, one of the best preserved medieval castles in the world, a UNESCO World Heritage Site on a ridge in modern Syria, its concentric walls still rising above the Homs Gap, its towers still intact. Visitors who climb those walls and look out across the plain below can still see what the Hospitaller garrison saw. Every approach visible, every army exposed, the geography of invincibility laid out in stone and distance. The castle outlasted everyone who fought over it. The Hospitaller order retreated from the Holy Land to Cyprus, then Rhodes, then Malta, where they held against the Ottoman siege of 1565 in one of the great defensive actions of the 16th century. The order exists today as the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, still issuing passports, still maintaining hospitals, still bearing the 8-pointed cross that flew above Croc for 130 years. Baybars continued dismantling the Crusader presence in the Holy Land. The last Crusader stronghold, Acre, fell in 1291, 20 years after Krak, ending the Crusader presence entirely. The Cold Open asked, what does it mean to build something so perfect that the only way to defeat it is to make its defenders defeat themselves? The answer is written in the walls that still stand above the Homs Gap, intact, unbreached, exactly as the Hospitallers left them. We build walls because we believe walls protect us, because the physical world feels controllable in ways the human world does not. A wall either holds or it doesn't. The mathematics are clear. But the mathematics only hold as long as the people behind the walls believe in what they are defending. The moment that belief fractures, through exhaustion, through isolation, through a forged letter arriving at exactly the right moment, the wall becomes stone again. Just stone, heavy and cold, and ultimately as penetrable as the mind of the man standing behind it. Croc des Chevaliers was never defeated. Its garrison was. And the difference between those two statements is the entire story. Croc des Chevaliers still stands. The walls have not changed. What those walls could and could not protect against? That is the question Baybars answered in 1271 with a piece of paper, and that anyone who has ever built something to protect what they love has been reckoning with ever since. When you imagine yourself in that garrison, reading that letter, believing it is from your Grand Master, making the decision to open the gates, do you see the forgery? Do you question it? Or do you do what the Hospitallers did, trust the authority you have always trusted, follow the order you believe you have received, and walk out of the walls that never failed you? If this video made you think, subscribe to the Clash of Ancients. We find the battles and sieges that history buries and bring them back. Share this with someone who thinks they know the Crusades. And drop a comment. Was Baybars' forged letter military genius, or a violation that dishonored the greatest defense in medieval history? This has been the Clash of Ancients. Some walls remember what was done behind them longer than the men who built them. And I will see you in the next one.